Welcome, Placer County home gardeners, to this wonderful Earth Day today. We're in Auburn, California, in a little backyard garden, and I'm going to be giving you some vegetable garden tips today. So hang with us. Now, we are going to have questions, so please do feel free to put questions in the comments, but we're not going to get to those until the end, okay? And also, if we have some technical difficulties, which can happen with these things, please just hang with us and hopefully they iron themselves out, okay? Next, my name is Kevin Marini, and I oversee the Placer County Master Gardener Program. It's a University of California volunteer program, and we do education outreach in the community. And if you search for Placer County Master Gardeners online, we have a great website with tons of resources, and we also have a great Facebook page. And also I want to thank Placer County Water Agency for hosting this event. They're really the ones that made this happen and invited me to participate. So, with that said, let's get started. I'm going to give you some easy, quick vegetable tips, and we have to start with soil because that's the basis for gardening in general, right? Good soil. So when it comes to vegetable gardening, and you're first starting, you kind of have to make a decision. Do I want to go with in-ground native soil beds, or do I want to build a raised bed or do vegetable gardening in containers if you have a small space, right? So the trend is to go the raised bed route. So that's what I'm going to focus on today in the limited amount of time I have. So when you do a raised bed, you can basically think of it as a container, a big container, right? And so the same type of consideration you give to your containers that you're growing things in on your porch, it's the same type of thoughts you should put towards what type of soil you want in your raised beds. And mostly that soil is going to be purchased and brought in, and it's going to be nice and crumbly and well draining, which is a positive, right? That's a good thing with raised beds. Give me a like if you're a raised bed vegetable gardener. I think that tends to be the most popular way people are doing this these days. So the soil in raised beds, because it's up above the ground, it warms up really quick, which is a benefit. It's well draining, which is a benefit. It has nutrients in it. That's a great benefit, right? Now the downside is that it drains really well and it warms up really fast. So those same things that are positives can also be negatives. In the hot summer, you have to really pay attention to watering in raised beds because they will dry out very quickly. So let's talk a little bit about how to determine if you have the proper soil moisture in your raised beds. I like these two soil moisture monitoring tools. Of course, you could always use just your finger, but of course that only gets you down to a certain depth, not deep enough where the roots are, right? So.
Get a little static in the microphone.
Okay.
Sorry, so you want to let them know?
Little static in the microphone is what I'm getting back. So.
We're going to turn it off.
Okay.
We're just going to talk live.
We're turning off the microphone. Okay.
You ready? Okay, let's try that.
Okay. So now you're just getting my unamplified voice, but I have a pretty loud voice. So getting back to the soil moisture monitoring. So like I said, using your finger is one way to do it, but you only get down to a certain depth, right? So using something like this, a soil moisture meter, is a good way to get really deep into the soil and make sure there's moisture way down there where the roots are, right? So in an annual vegetable growing situation, the roots aren't going to go extremely deep, maybe not this deep, but for trees and shrubs and things, this really comes in handy. The main thing with these moisture meters is that you water an area, you apply the moisture meter, and you look at the reading of the moisture meter. Because that way you're calibrating it. You're just not going by what the meter reading says, okay? You're saying, I've watered this is saturated soil, and this is the reading I'm getting when the soil is saturated. That will be your mark that you're kind of shooting for, right? Your high mark. Then, of course, when the soil is completely dried out and you put it back in, you want to mark where that reading is. So that way the moisture meter has some relevance to your own garden. You're not just going by the numbers or the lines on the moisture meter. That's how these can be really useful. So use these. Give me a like or a heart if you've ever used a soil moisture meter. Another tool that I absolutely love is this soil sampler. Many times people don't think of these as a way to monitor soil moisture, but if you plunge this into the soil and you get a little cross section, you can see where the moist soil is starting to give way to the drier soil, and it gives you a depth. So you have a really good idea where the moisture is in the depth of the soil, and then you can relate that to the types of plants you're growing. Are you growing, corn, tomatoes, or squash, or just maybe shallow rooted lettuce, right? That doesn't need water way down 12 feet down into the soil. So these two tools can really help you. Of course, using your finger, using a screwdriver, those are options as well. But having proper watering in a vegetable garden is crucial to having success. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about nutrients in a vegetable garden soil. So when you purchase soil and fill your raised beds for the first time, it is very likely that there's going to be plenty of nutrients in there for you to have an initial great vegetable garden. So it's normal that I see in raised beds the first year, I call it freshman bumper crops, okay? And then it's also very common for me to see the next year a sophomore slump, right? So what happens is all that organic matter that you filled these raised beds with, it gets used up. The nutrients get used up by the plants. The actual organic material decomposes. You may notice in your raised beds how you filled it up to the top year 1, and year 2 it's about 2 inches lower, and year 3 it could be 6 inches lower, right? So you don't want that. What you're committing to when you do raised bed vegetable gardening is amending those beds and keep getting that level back up to its original every single time you turn over a crop, okay? If you're trying to grow multiple crops over time in the same soil that you brought in initially, you're going to see a constant decline in your vegetable garden. So amending your beds is so important, and that also will help hold water in your beds and make watering easier as well. We recommend adding compost, good quality compost, a couple inches every time you turn over a crop. You can use a garden fork to gently incorporate it in, okay? So now let's kind of move into the actual vegetables themselves, right? I'm gonna focus in on the most popular vegetable grown in home gardens all across America, the good old homegrown tomato. If you've ever tasted a tomato that is ripe off of a tomato plant that is still, warm from the sun, it's a pretty amazing thing, if you like tomatoes. And if you compare that to something you buy at the store, I guarantee you will be motivated to try growing tomatoes at home, okay? You can grow tomatoes in raised beds, in your native soil in-ground beds, even in containers on a porch, as long as you're getting about 6 hours of sun, because you need that sun to create flowers and fruit, okay? You could have beautiful tomato plants in the shade, but they won't actually give you any fruit, okay? And you really want the fruit. So when it comes to tomatoes, here's just, this is gonna get a little technical, okay? But it's really important for you guys to understand this basic premise. There are indeterminate types of tomatoes and determinate types of tomatoes. An indeterminate tomato is one that grows, flowers, fruits, and grows more, and flowers and fruits more. Kind of like a vine. It just keeps growing, it keeps flowering, it keeps fruiting. And so you're going to have tomatoes over a long span of time. And in general, those tomatoes in the indeterminate types are your big slicing tomatoes that you want to put on your burgers, right? Or maybe have a mozzarella, basil, tomato salad or something like that, right? Now, the determinate tomatoes are very different, okay? The determinate tomatoes grow to a certain point, they flower, they fruit, they ripen, and they're done, okay? So those tomatoes the varieties that are determinate types tend to be your sauce tomatoes, like your Roma tomatoes, for example. So if you want to make some pasta sauce, you're better off getting a determinate tomato, growing it and harvesting all the tomatoes at one time to make your sauce, versus the indeterminates, which are going to produce tomatoes over a huge span of time and are more for your salads and sandwiches. Okay? So that's really, really important. Now, when planting tomatoes, there's a kind of a special little tip when you're planting tomatoes. Tomatoes do this really interesting thing where they have what's called adventitious roots, which means that you can take this tomato plant that you bought at the nursery and plant it in the ground much deeper than they planted it at the nursery, okay? So you pinch off some of the first levels of leaves. So see how the leaves are coming out this node here? I'm gonna pinch that completely off, okay? Because I'm actually gonna plant that underground, okay? And underground, what happens is, instead of forming shoots, there will form roots out of that wound that I just made right there. So you may have heard in the past, plant tomatoes deep. This is what that means, okay? So you're gonna take your tomato plant, and you can tell this one is totally poised, primed, ready to go. Not root bound whatsoever, nice white roots, perfect, great size. And I'm gonna bend down now, hopefully this works out. And I'm going to use this little trowel to open up the soil and dig a nice deep hole. And I'm going to plant the tomato. And what you'll notice is when I put the soil back around this tomato, the level is now much higher than it was in the nursery pot, okay? So that is the correct way to plant tomatoes. Now remember, if you are growing an indeterminate tomato, the one that just keeps growing and growing and growing, you're gonna need something to hold it up. Otherwise, it's just gonna flop on the ground, right? So you need a stake that you could tie the tomato to. You need a tomato cage. I think there's even some in the background here. So something like this would work great, you know, around the tomato to give it support. You need support for the plant and also those big fruits that you're hopefully gonna get, right? Now the determinate tomatoes, they usually kind of just stand on their own, but if it gets really heavy with fruit, it could probably also benefit from a tomato cage or some sort of support as well, okay? So let's talk a little bit about watering your vegetable garden, okay? When it comes to watering, it's gonna depend, your system is gonna depend on what you're doing out there, okay? So for example, let's say you wanna grow corn, okay? Corn is best grown from seed, direct seeded right into the soil. You can grow corn and transplant it, but it's better when it's direct seeded, okay? So think of big seeds as being the best types of seeds to direct seed. So corn, beans, squashes, pumpkins, right? Those should be direct seeded right in the spot in your garden where you want them. But the thing is, if you do direct seed, then you have to commit yourself to very constant, shallow watering until that seed germinates and pops, okay? So when it gets warm out, like this nice warm spring day we have today, that top of the soil could dry out very quickly. So when you plant your corn, you might have to visit your garden 2 or 3 times that day and spray it to make sure that the seed is staying moist. It's going to absorb that water, germinate, and pop. And at that point, once you have germinated and growing plants, then you could actually utilize drip irrigation, soaker hoses, things like that. But if you're direct seeding, you're probably going to want to rely on sprinkler or hand watering to get them to pop, okay? Now, if you're doing transplants, like what we just did here with the tomato, you can immediately install drip irrigation, which can deliver water directly right to the plant you're growing. So if you don't have water directed right to the plant where it's growing, and you're watering the large area of your vegetable garden, then you're not only growing vegetable plants, you're growing weeds as well, right? So drip irrigation is good because it is efficient and it helps minimize the weeds that are going to pop up all over your garden, okay? Now, remember, I'm going to say it one more time. There are tools like soil moisture meters and a soil sampler, right? Where you can, check and make sure that you're getting adequate moisture in your soil, okay? So the next thing I want to mention is mulch, okay? So just because you have gotten your raised bed built and the soil in it and your plants planted and they're watered in doesn't mean you're done yet. Mulch is a crucial component to vegetable gardens. And most people pretty much think that you use mulch because you want to conserve the moisture in the soil. And by far, that's probably the best reason to use mulch. But there are other reasons as well, okay? Mulch can actually reflect light off the soil surface and actually keep the soil cool, because most vegetable roots don't like to be in really, really warm soil, okay? Like really warm soil. So mulch helps conserve water. It also helps keep the temperature, soil temp, where it should be. And it also keeps those darn weeds from popping up. And so mulch, is a great thing. And so you don't really want to skimp either. You really want to apply the mulch thickly. I don't have enough mulch here to mulch this whole space, so I'm just showing you in this little tiny space how thick it is around that tomato plant, right? And like I said, this is going to have multiple benefits, even some soil building benefits over time as it breaks down, okay? There's lots of different mulches you can use. Some people, there's some organic farmers even that, use plastic mulch. It's what it's called, plastic covering over the soil with little holes cut in it, and plant their tomatoes in that, right? You can use wood chips, for example, is a mulch material. So that you don't have to use what I'm using, which is rice straw, okay? Straw is nice because it really allows the soil to still breathe as well. So with that, I think we're going to transition to questions, or do I have some more time to keep talking? We're going to take some questions? Okay. All right, so we have some questions, which is fun. That's great. So Cindy has a question. How do I know if my soil needs amendments? So remember I said that when you're starting a garden, a raised bed vegetable garden, and you're bringing in fresh material, it is very likely that your soil is going to have plenty of nutrients to give yourself a good crop initially. It's every crop after that where you're wondering, do I need to add amendments to make sure that all the nutrients are in there? The only way that you're going to know if you need to add amendments to your soil, you're going to know by looking at your plants, so observing, did your plants do well or did they not do well? If they didn't do well and you watered correctly and you planted correctly and all those things, and you know it's not an insect or that type of problem, then it's likely that there's some nutrient deficiency going on and you may need to add some nutrients. The only way you're going to know exactly how is to actually test your soil. That's the only way. They sell soil test kits at nurseries, so over-the-counter soil test kits that you can try out and use. If you've ever tried one, give me a like. I want to know how many people are using those, okay? Now, there is a formal soil analysis that's done through a lab. That you send your soil out, you get analysis, and then you bring it to me to help you read it, okay? So that's how you know about amendments. Another question from Linda. Best time to grow cilantro. Yes, so everyone grows their tomatoes and peppers, right, during the summer, but guess what? That's not the best time to grow cilantro. So unfortunately, when it comes to salsa, you have to get a little tricky when it comes to growing cilantro during the warm season. Cilantro prefers cool season, okay? So it likes spring and fall. It doesn't love our summers, and it tends to bolt. Bolt is a term that means that the plant is going to seed, and once it goes to seed, the taste can sometimes get bitter, the quality goes down. So you don't want that to happen. So believe it or not, you're best to grow cilantro during the shoulder seasons of the spring and the fall. in the cooler season, you'll have beautiful cilantro. Okay. Do I have time for one last question? One more? Okay. Let's see here.
What vegetables work in shade?
Okay. Next question. What vegetables work in shade? And so like I was just talking about cilantro, you can, if you have microclimates in your yard where you have a spot that stays really cool and doesn't get a lot of sun, believe it or not, you can grow leafy greens and things like cilantro even during the summer if you have those microclimates, right? But really when it comes to shade, you're limited to non-fruiting vegetables. So you're looking at your lettuces and your arugula and your greens, right? Those can be grown in shady conditions, dappled sunlight conditions just fine. But when you're talking about fruiting vegetables, okay, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, potatoes, corn, squashes, you need sun. And so if you do not have at least 6 hours of direct sunlight, you're going to have to choose those low sunlight types of vegetables, okay? So, the website, yes. So, reminding me to mention the website. So the Placer County Master Gardeners have a great website with plenty of gardening information and a real active Facebook page as well. You could submit questions through our website. Even right now, our office is currently closed with the coronavirus situation, but we are still taking online inquiries through our website. Okay, so do that if you have a question right now. And of course, please visit the Placer County Water Agency website and ask them any questions you may have about your water situation. They also have water efficiency staff that can come out on site and give you some advice on watering around in your yard as well. So I hope you enjoyed this Facebook Live event, and thank you again for Placer County Water Agency for hosting this, and happy gardening.